Before we start this video, a large thank you to a name I unfortunately cannot pronounce. Thank you for the support, my friend. John Doe, Nate Peters, another name I cannot pronounce. Thank you so much for the support. Duck Tape, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Thank you, my friend. Apple, and Sebastian, great name by the way, for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And a special thank you to Halo Burner for their immense support of the channel this month on Patreon. It really means the most, man. I hope you enjoy the video. Good day, everybody. So before we start the topic of the video, you can see here if I get whacked twice, I die, but I don't actually put the death animation. This was reported by a user, and this is a very simple fix. If we go over to the take damage effect here, you can see we're calculating our damage and then playing a damage effect. This is important. Make sure you calculate your damage first, because when we go over here on the play damage animation, we're going to say if the character is dead, just return and do nothing. This effect is definitely still going to be added onto a whole lot, so it's going to change a bunch when we start adding stuff like poise. But yeah, this is just a very, very simple fix. This is how we're going to handle it just right here. If you're dead, don't play animation. Also, I know it's just a debug animation, or rather a debug function, but the revive function doesn't work. And that's because we have two states called empty, when one should be called upper body empty and one should be called empty. Two states should never have the same name at one time. And then you also need to come in here again and say under if is owner is dead.value is equal to false. Now, if we use this debug function again, I know it is just a debug function, but it's good for testing. You'll see that after I click it, I will get back up. And also when I get hit, I play the proper death animation. So that fixes that. Make sure you're also changing the name on the clone too. If you didn't save it, you might need to restart the clone for that to show up in the animator. Okay, so now let's actually handle locking onto a target and making our camera face them properly. So let's jump over to the player camera script and let's add a new variable here under lock on. And we're going to make this a private list of character managers and we're going to call it available targets. So this is the list of potential targets. Let's initialize that as a new list. This is the list of potential targets that you're going to sort through and pick one for locking onto. And we're going to pick the closest one right now. So under else, we're going to say available targets.add, and then we're going to pass the lock on target. So basically, it's going to iterate through however many potential lock on targets you have, and we're going to then choose one based on which is the closest. I'm going to add a comment here. It's going to say, lastly, if the target is outside of the field of view or is blocked by environment, or you could say geo, whatever you want to say, we're going to continue and check the next potential target. Okay. So, and then down here we can say else, or otherwise we add this target to our potential targets list. Okay, cool. Now, right below here, I'm going to make a for loop below the original for loop, and I'm going to change I to K because we're already using I. I'm actually going to erase that and put it actually outside. I realize now it's inside the for loop here. You want it outside the for loop. You want to run this after we've checked for all the targets in the area. So after we have checked for all the targets in the area, I'm going to say for I, K is equal to 0 as long as K is less than, and then we're going to check through our available targets list. So we're going to iterate through each target in this list. So I'm going to make a comment here. We now sort through our potential targets to see which one is the closest, so which one we lock onto first. And then we can start by saying if available targets K does not equal null, then we're going to run some logic. So we're going to make a float for the distance from target. That's going to be equal to vector 3 distance between our player dot transform dot position and then the available targets K dot transform dot position. So that was pretty straightforward. You can ignore the vector 3 here. I was just checking something and forgot to delete it when I hit record again. So we're going to say if distance from target is less than shortest distance, then we're going to say shortest distance now equals distance from target. So you can see here it's going to check through every target, and then it's going to take the shortest distance in the end. And then we're going to say nearest lock on target is equal to available targets K. So every time you find a target that's closer, this will update and change until you've gone through the whole list, and at the end you have the shortest one. So let's make the variable now for nearest target. Let's go up here, private character manager nearest lock on target. So again, we get our first list to see which ones are potentially available, and then through those potential targets, we check for the closest one. Now that we have an actual way to get a target, oh right, we can also delete this maximum distance variable. As a gentleman pointed out in the comments section, this lock-on radius here on the physics.overlap sphere is actually equivalent to the maximum radius because it will be at the edge of the sphere. So we don't need that there. We can remove that, and then we can also remove the variable up here as well. Okay, so now we have a list of lock-on targets, and then we have a way of discerning our closest target. Now let's actually jump over to the player input manager, and let's say if player camera.instance.nearest target does not equal null. Oh, we gotta make that public. So let's go back over here and make this public. Then we need to assign that target. So this is under if we are not locked on and press the lock on input, we handle locating lock on targets. And if the nearest target is not null, then we need to assign this as our target. So how are we going to do that? Well, we need to do it in a way that the network is notified too, because you're going to need to know who other people are locked onto, so we can rotate their character and also make them play strafing animations. And we'll need it for AI data in the future as well. So we're going to say player.playerNetworkManager.isLockedOn.value is equal to true. But then we're going to make a function also to set this target. So let's go over to the character combat manager. Let's make a public virtual void. I'm going to call this set target. Let's make it require a character manager, call that new target. This is on the character combat manager because the AI will also use this function in the future. So we're going to check if we are the owner. And to do that, let's first actually make a character manager variable because we're going to need that anyway. Let's call it character. And let's call that on awake by using getComponent because it sits on the same game object as this one. So we're going to say character is equal to getComponent character manager. Now we're going to say if character.isOwner run some logic. What do we want to do? Well, we want to actually notify the server that we have a target using their specific network object ID. So if new target does not equal null, else current target is equal to null. If it doesn't equal null, then you can only lock onto character managers. And as we know, all characters have a network object on them. So we're going to say current target equals new target, but also let's tell the network that we have a new target. So to do that, we're going to use a network variable of type, I think it's called oolong. I never know if it's oolong or oolong. If someone knows that in the comments, let me know, please. So let's go over to the character network manager and let's make a header for this. We can just call it target. If you want to, you can put it in combat or just whatever, again, makes the most sense to you. I'm going to give it its own header. Just call it target. And I'm going to put it under the animator here. So again, public network variable, oolong, and you can call this current lock-on target network ID or current lock-on target network object ID, current target ID, whatever makes the most sense to you. For me, it's going to be current target network object ID because that's exactly what it is. And then I'm going to say that it equals as a new network variable type oolong and then 0 network variable read permissions everybody, write permissions owner, just the pretty standard stuff. Seems like autocomplete doesn't want to work for me today, so I'm just going to copy and paste that. Okay, so once we have this now, it's pretty simple how we pass along the network object ID. All we do is say character.character network manager. Character.character network manager dot current target network object ID dot value is equal to new target dot get component network object, and I'm gonna have to say using unity.net code for this up here, and I'm gonna have to make this derived from a network behavior. Is that what it's called? Oh, I gotta put in the namespace first. So come up here and say using unity.net code, make this derived from a network behavior so we can use network stuff, and then we're gonna say new target dot get component network object. We're going to say dot network object ID. Okay, so now we've told the server which specific object we're locked onto using its ID. And then from there, we can get the character manager back on the other side, and I will show you how. So let's go back over to the character network manager and let's make a new public void on lock on target ID changed. Let's make it require an oolong for old ID and new ID. This is going to be called using on value changed, as you probably guessed. So whenever our current lock on target ID changes, we're going to run this. So we're going to say if we are not the owner, and why are we doing that? Well, we've already, as you can see here, I'll go back over and show you've already assigned our target locally, so we don't need to do it again. So we don't need to run this again. We've already done this ourselves. The owner has already done it. No need to run it twice. But if we're not the owner, then we still need to run it. So we're going to say if we are not the owner, we're going to say our character combat manager dot current target is equal to, and then we're going to say network manager dot singleton. Then we're going to reference the spawn manager, and then we're going to get spawn objects, and we're going to pass the new ID here. Then we're going to say dot game object dot get component character manager, and that is how you get it. Now, like our weapons and other things, if you join a game, then you're not getting this on lock on target changed fired because it changed before you joined. So over here on load other players when joining server, let's just do the same thing for lock on as we do for weapons. So we're going to say if player network manager dot is locked on dot value, then we're just going to say player network manager dot on current lock on target ID change and pass the current lock on target ID as the new ID, and that will basically just, again, sync the target that they would already have before you joined, but for when you join. Because remember, on value changed only runs when it changes, so if it changes before you join, that doesn't update for you, which is why we do this again. Same thing for our weapons. So let's save that, and we are good to go. Now, let's jump back over here to the input manager here, and let's say player combat manager set target, and then let's pass our player camera nearest lock on target. Okay, now if we jump into the game here, I'm going to duplicate our dummy. So we're going to have dummy 01 and dummy 02. You might want to hit spawn here too on the network object ID, do the same thing as me, or else you can't move them because you have to spawn them on the network because it's a network object. Okay, so I'm going to rename one to dummy 01 and one to dummy 02. I just want to verify now that basically I'm locking onto the closest one. So if I go into game and I go to my player, you can see now if I were to go down to my character combat manager, let's do that first to make sure I'm not locked on. So current target is null. If I click the lock on button, I lock onto dummy 01. Works as intended. Now if I go over here and click it, nothing happens. Why is that? Well, we don't have a way to unlock right now or clear the targets. So let's go do that right now real fast. Just going to go back now into Visual Studio and save this. And then I'm going to go over to the player camera and right down here on the end, what happens if the target is null? Well, we want to say else. We want to disable lock on and clear the targets. So we're going to say player.playerNetworkManager.isLockedOn.value is equal to false. And then we're going to call a function that doesn't exist yet called clear lock on targets. And we're going to use the same function to again clear the targets and relock on when we try to target someone else again. So we're going to make a public void clear lock on targets. And this is going to change a little bit in the next episode too. We're going to add a bit to this one because right now we only have the nearest target. We don't have the nearest left and nearest right targets either. But for now, all we need to do is say nearest lock on target is equal to null. And then we're going to say available targets dot clear. And that's it really. So let's save that. Let's go to the player input manager now. And we're going to say is lock on is equal to false right here. So if you're already locked on, when you click the lock on input, disable lock on. But also you want to clear the targets. So the next time you come back in, it's going to be a fresh list. So let's just say player camera.instance.clear lock on targets right before we jump out. And we save that. Now if I go back into the game here, I click on dummy 01, there you go. But I have to click twice to lock on to dummy 02 because I have to click once to unlock and then once to click on again to lock on to dummy 02. But what should happen is that when I click once, it should clear my target. I shouldn't keep a target until I lock on again. So let's also do that. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio here now, and we're going to make it so that when we unlock, we clear our current target. So we're going to use isLockedOn.value. What we're going to do is basically make a onValue change for this as well. And what we're going to do is say public void on is lock on changed, bool old value, and then bool are we currently locked on. So is locked on. And now if we are locked on, that's great. We don't need to do anything. But if we're not locked on, what we want to do is just clear our target by saying character combat manager dot current target is equal to null. And that's it. So we need to call this now on network spawn though. So let's go over to the player manager and let's go to on network spawn Let's make a section for these new lock-on value change calls. Let's do it outside of if_is_owner because this should fire on every game object regardless if you own it or not. So I'm going to make a comment here for lock-on, and I'm just going to say player network manager dot is locked on dot on value changed plus equals player network manager dot on is lock on changed. And then we can do the same thing for our current target ID. So we can say player network manager dot current target ID dot on value changed plus equals player network manager, and what did we call that? On lock on target ID change. Okay, cool. So let's save that. And if I go into the game here now, I can lock onto dummy 1, unlock, my target clears. As you can see, lock onto dummy 2, unlock, and my target clears. So basically one click locks you on and another click will unlock you completely. Cool. Now let's actually rotate towards the lock on target if we are locked on. So we're going to say if, this is under handle rotations by the way, under the player camera script, if player.player network manager dot is not locked on. Actually, we're going to say if we are locked on, otherwise, because that's what our comments say here from earlier. So if we are locked on, we're going to do some logic. Otherwise, all of the old logic goes in this else statement. And then we can actually move our comments above the proper part of the if statement here and keep them there. So if we are locked on, force rotation towards the target. Otherwise, rotate normally. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's start by rotating the main game object, so the game object that this player camera is on. And then we'll rotate the pivot object, which is the player or the object that goes up and down, basically. So we're going to say vector3.rotation direction is equal to player.player combat manager dot current target dot character combat manager, and then we're going to reference their lock-on transform. So that's the place dot position dot minus the transform dot position of this camera. So that's the place that you actually have on their body that you want to look at when you lock on. So next we're going to say rotation direction dot normalize, and then we're going to say rotation direction dot y is equal to 0. We don't want any y in this because this is this is basically the rotation for looking left and right that forces the camera to kind of follow the target left and right across the screen. So you could say main player camera object up here. You want, just keep in mind one is a pivot for up and down and one is left and right. This is the portion that's going to do it for left and right. So the comments are very similar down below. As you can see, it says rotate this game object left and right. So we're going to say quaternion target rotation is equal to quaternion.look rotation direction. So we're looking in the direction of the target from this camera's transform.position, and then we're rotating towards that direction by saying transform.rotation equals quaternion slurp transform.rotation to our new target rotation, and then we're going to pass a value for the lock-on target snap speed. And actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, it would sound much better, and the name fits it much better if we call it lock-on target follow speed, because this is the rate at which your camera is going to follow the lock-on target across the screen. So the rate at which it's going to change its rotation to trace where your target is running, basically. So let's make a serializable field for a float, and we'll call this lock-on target follow speed. I'm going to make mine 0.2, and that's nice to me after testing it in-game, but feel free to adjust it as you see fit. So let's actually change this top comment, because looking back at it now, it's kind of horrendous. It doesn't make sense really to say main player game object. I'm going to say this rotates this game object. That's a lot more simple. So you can even say this rotates it left and right. I'm just going to say this rotates this game object, and this rotates the pivot object. So remember again, pivot up and down. The main game object is left and right. So we're going to say rotation direction is equal to player combat manager current target character combat manager of that current target lock on transform of that current target position minus the camera pivot transform position this time. Okay. And then we're going to say the rotation direction normalize again. We're not canceling out the y this time because this is the up and down part of the camera. So if the target is above you or below you, you want to be able to adjust for that. And then we're going to say target rotation is equal to quaternion dot look rotation from the rotation direction. And then we're going to say the camera pivot transform dot transform rotation is equal to quaternion.slurp between the current camera pivot transform.rotation, the target rotation, and then the lock-on target follow speed. Okay. And then lastly, right down here, we want to actually save our rotation values so that when you unlock, it doesn't snap halfway across the screen. So basically, you want to have it unlock in a similar area to where you're locked on. Let's say you're looking up before you lock on, then you lock into a guy a little bit below you. You don't want it to snap back up. It'd be kind of weird. So we're going to save our rotations to our look angles, so when we unlock, it doesn't snap too far away from where we're currently looking. So we're going to say left and right look angle is equal to transform.eulerangles.y, and up and down look angle is equal to transform.eulerangles.x. And now if I go into the game and lock onto this target, you can see, there we go, the camera does definitely snap onto them, and as I run around, it traces them. Snapping it again, or clicking lock on again, unlocks, and then clicking lock on again, relocks. So that is definitely working as intended. Now, we're not done. We're going to add strafing, and we're going to change the camera's behavior when you lock on a little bit more. So basically what we want to do in the future is make it so that when you're locked on, you want to raise the camera up a little bit, and I'll just show you. I'll go over to the camera pivots. You want to take the camera pivot, the height's 1.5. If I set it to 2, you can see it looks a bit better. And that's what happens in Souls games too. You're kind of just above yourself a little bit. It's also a good indicator to tell when you lock on, because the camera kind of jolts up a little bit. Nicely, of course. It isn't a jitter. It kind of like pans up, and you get a better visual of the thing you're actually locked onto. So we're going to do that in the next episode, and then we're going to add strafing while we're locked on. And if we have time in the next episode, we're also going to handle switching between left and right targets of the current target you're locked onto. So thank you very much for joining me again. I hope you all have a very lovely weekend, and I hope you learned something new. I will see you all next week.